Thank you all very much for coming out. I'm really excited about our talk today. This is our August Art at Noon talk with Daniel Fulco from the Washington County Museum of Art. I wanted to let everyone know to check out upcoming classes. We just got our new magazine in last week, I think, and for upcoming classes in the fall. So we have lots of classes coming up, lots of great programming and exhibitions coming up. And take some time to check out the exhibitions that we have on the second floor and here on the first floor, including our Over 70 show, which you're sitting in right now. And then off to the side of the East Gallery is Dave Moreland's exhibition. And there's two great exhibitions on the second floor as well. So take some time and check those out. But we've got some great exhibitions for September and throughout the fall. So keep your eyes peeled for all that good stuff. So I'm really excited about our talk today. The Washington County Museum of Art, to me, was a little bit of like a hidden treasure. I stumbled across it. I think our family was visiting the Hagerstown Park with our daughter, and stumbled across the museum. And when I walked through the halls and saw Renaissance paintings and things, I was like, this is amazing. I didn't know that this was here. So I'm really excited to hear from Daniel today and hear more about their collection. But I'm going to introduce Daniel, and then I'm going to let him take it away. So Daniel Fulco serves as Agnita M. Stine Schreiber Curator at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. He's the curator of the recent exhibition Joshua Johnson, Portraitist of Early American Baltimore, and edited its accompanying catalog, both of which were supported by grants from the NEA, the ADAA Foundation, and other donors. Dr. Fulco received his doctoral degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he was a distinguished fellow from 2007 to 2010. He's a scholar of European and American art from the 17th to the 19th centuries and has authored a book, numerous edited volume chapters, and articles. Everybody welcome with me, Daniel Fulco.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you everybody for coming today. It's my great pleasure to speak to you today about this very fine museum, Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. And one of the things that we're trying to do is actually become more known regionally and nationally, and to some regard, as we've often been referred to as a hidden gem, we're trying to grow beyond that and sort of expand our reach. And one of the reasons, in part for my coming over here to speak to you about the museum. Some of you may be familiar with it, but others of you may not. So I'm going to take you sort of on a virtual tour of the museum of sorts today, and talk to you a bit about its history, and then I'm going to look at some works from the collection in focus, and then after that I'm going to end with an interesting discovery that I recently made. So without further ado, let's begin. The Museum of Fine Arts was founded in 1928, and it was actually a very interesting story. It was the subject of a dinner discussion in New York City in the late 1920s, where ideas were written up on pieces of paper and napkins to found a museum in Hagerstown City Park. And while the park had been there since 1922, it did not have a fine arts museum. So it is founded by these people right up here, Anna and William Singer. They are the reason why we have the museum. This photograph here shows the county commissioners at the time that the museum opened in 1931. The cornerstone was laid in 1930, and as you can see here on the cover of the Baltimore Sun, it was really a big deal at the time. To this day, this is the only art museum in Western Maryland. We have, I believe, 5 accredited fine arts museums in the state of Maryland. We are one of those 5, the others being mostly in Baltimore, and then also you have the Academy Museum on the Eastern Shore. So we are it in terms of serving the Cumberland Valley, Frederick, and the Quad State region to our west. The Singers are very interesting people. These are a couple of photos that show the museum when it opened in 1930. Just 3 parts. the large sculpture court over here, which is where you would have entered in through these doors, and then just 2 side galleries. It's going to expand later on. William and Anna met each other actually in Hagerstown. William is originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was born there in 1868. His father was a steel and iron magnate, and William became interested in art at an early age. He was not interested in pursuing a career as a family industrialist. Instead, he wanted to become a painter and to basically kind of, in certain regards, withdraw from society, and we'll discover how that happens a bit later. This here lists some of the exhibitions he had, including Carnegie International in Pittsburgh in 1900. But for Singer, he didn't want to stay in Pittsburgh. He often wrote about how the poor quality industrial air there, the pollution, bothered him in many regards. As was common for people of their social class at the time, William being slightly above Anna, their marriage was arranged. And she came from Hagerstown, from a merchant family. They also, I think, owned some properties. The photo on the lower left there shows her house on Dunn Irving Drive, which is right across the park from the museum. And this is their wedding picture right over here. They marry in 1895, but they do not stay in this region very long. They are going to make their way overseas. That's William as a young boy with his dog. That shows what Pittsburgh looked like when William was growing up. And you can kind of get the idea why he wanted to withdraw to nature. This is a painting by a scalp level artist. This was a group of landscapists that worked in Pittsburgh and the surrounding area. And originally, Singer studied with this artist, George Hetzel. And this is an early watercolor by him of the Laurel Highlands. Those of you who know Fallingwater House, this is the region to the southeast of Pittsburgh. It's like an hour and 40 minutes. So he would withdraw there in the 1880s and 90s, and he would go on sketching trips with artists like George Hetzel and their circle. These are the industrialists that William's family would have come into contact with. Up there is actually William's father with the big handlebar mustache, and then you have all kinds of other Pittsburgh families that are shown here. One of the estates of the Singers that was outside of the city. And also I should mention on here somewhere, if you pick him out, I can't find him at the moment, is Henry Clay Frick. And Frick would have known the Singers. This over here is a cup that the Fricks actually gave to the Singers for their wedding gift. So he is born into this milieu, and the reason why he's able to become an artist is because his father holds a dinner in, I believe it's 1905, September of that year, either 1904 or 1905, and he gives each of the 4 children $4 million. So a total of $16 million. You can imagine how much money this was. Back in the early 1900s, $4 million each. It's a fortune. And with that, William is able to become an independent artist and basically create these beautiful landscapes. The ones you're looking at here are of Norway for much of the rest of his life. He does not have to work for money. And as he said, until 1901, when I started for Paris, I existed only. From that time, a chance was given to me to live. And by that, what he meant was when he went to Paris, he did undertake training with J.P. Laurence, who was a famous academic painter and teacher in Paris at the time. He became enamored by French art, particularly Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. And when he comes back to the United States after first going to Paris, studying as a student, and he has a special exhibition in Pittsburgh at the J.J. Gillespie and Company Gallery. And this kind of launches his career. At the same time, he was also exhibiting at the famous Carnegie International, which exists in a certain form today, still at the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. And in 1901, he starts to develop this more impressionistic style, moving away from the tighter, more realistic compositions of the scalp-level artists. And this is called Beach at Monhegan. He will take trips not only to Europe, but he also goes up to Maine, at Monhegan Island with the Artist Colony, and also at the Old Lyme Artist Colony. And this is a painting in our collection. It's among my favorites, by the great Child Hassam, American Impressionist, noted for his series of American flags along I believe it's Fifth Avenue in New York City. But he also spends a lot of time at the North Shore of Massachusetts in Gloucester. And sure enough, William Singer meets Child Hassam in the very early 1900s, and they exchange artistic ideas with one another. He also befriends other artists like Willard Metcalf. We have a wonderful Metcalf called New England Afternoon in the collection. He's not really close friends with Hassam, more of a colleague, but he's influenced by his work, as you can see in this painting over here, and as we go through. But what happens with William and Anna is they don't want to stay in the United States. They're really captivated by Europe, and so what they do is they decide to move over to Holland. And you might ask yourselves, well, why do they pick the Netherlands? They pick it because the Singers come into contact with a group of artists called the Laren School. And the Laren School of Artists is named after this small town outside of Amsterdam. They painted in an impressionistic style. Some of them, such as Anton Mauva down here on the lower left, are more realistic. Others, like Joseph Israels, are more, they use looser brushwork, sometimes impasto as well. This painting here is also in our collection. You can see it in the museum, it's on view. This is one of William's early Netherlandish scenes of these beautiful meadows near Kempen, which wasn't very far away from where they lived in Laren. So they go to Laren, and they purchase a house, and they stay there and become part of its artistic community. And I'll come back and talk about these two pictures afterwards. So Laren is really important to this couple. This is the Villa de Wilde Zwanen, or the Villa of the Wild Swans. This is the first house that they purchase, and it is connected to a museum, and we'll touch on that afterwards. This shows you an interior view, I'll show you a couple of others, of how the Singers displayed their art collection. Not only is William a painter, they are also collectors. And Anna really does the collecting. She supports her husband in terms of his endeavors. She herself actually is a bit of an amateur artist. She does some sketching. And here's a couple of other photos of De Wilde Zwanen villa. Look at the oriental carpets here. Let me try to zoom in, if I can get that to work so you can see. The Singers are very worldly people. You have Persian rugs, you have European paintings from the mid to late 19th century. You have, if you look carefully over here, statuettes. You'll even find some Asian art that's interspersed. See the vases over there? And all kinds of portraits, you name it. In a kind of Victorian manner, they put all of the things that they love into their interiors. Some of these things end up at our museum later on in 1931. And you can see that here as well. You can see the portraits on the wall, and also their furniture. Some of it comes to the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. But they have this worldly vision, the Singers, and that is part of what they use as the founding of the mission of the museum in terms of its outlook. In other words, it's not restricted to the exhibition and the collection of one kind of art, American, European. It's everything, and it makes for great diversity. Later on in their lives, they will purchase this villa called the Villa Nederham in Blaricum, which is also very close to Amsterdam. So by living in Laren, in the suburb, Laren and also Blaricum, they're able to enjoy the city life in terms of artistic exhibitions and its resources, because Amsterdam is a major city of the Netherlands. And there, William is going to gain gallery representation by Frans Buffa and Sons. That's his dealer. So they were strategic in terms of where they were choosing to live at this time. They also would take trips to Paris. And this photo over here shows again how they kind of push everything together. Some of William's paintings are juxtaposed with portraits. You have some Chinese art that's over here. And then the Wise and the Foolish Virgin statuettes there. Let me zoom in at the fireplace. You can see those outside our Singer Gallery at the Art Museum. So they send them over in 1949. They're right over there. by the sculptor Ernest von Weinans. So it's really interesting to look at this. And I should point out, we have a sister museum, as a matter of fact. It was founded in 1956, and that's basically what the Singers do. First, they start out by establishing the WCMFA in Hagerstown to open in 31. And then in 56, Anna Singer dies in 1960 or 61, I believe, they establish the Singer-Lauren. Now, William dies in 1943, so that's before her. She becomes a widow. And the other half of the collection goes to Singer-Lauren. Our museum had an exchange with Singer-Lauren in 2006-07. It was actually a very large exhibition. It was the first of such kind. And they have many of Singer's paintings, but they also have Dutch modernists. They have some Asian art. And they share a lot of similarities with our institution, though they don't really have any old masters and some other world cultures, and not really much in the way of American art. And the other place that's of critical importance to the Singers, this is where they divide their time. They're going to go here in winters, different seasons, it depends on which year it is, Norway, into a small village called Olden. And Olden is not very far away from Bergen. If any of you are familiar with Norway, Bergen is kind of south central. So they're within reach of going to Bergen if they need to, for things in the city, shopping, and or other entertainment. That shows Singer down there. This is the beautiful house and studio. It's called Dahlheim. And I just recently learned that this became a bed and breakfast. For a long time, it had kind of just been sitting there. And it is going to be preserved, but unfortunately not as a house museum. So we kind of have these interesting connections to the Hagerstown Museum and the Singers all over the world. And that is part of this international quality and outlook of Anna and William. This is his studio, which is still today preserved. And this is where he would work for much of his life. During World War II, that is in the early to mid-40s, the Singers during the Nazi occupation were placed under house arrest as American citizens in occupied territory. So he stayed there, and actually at that time he kind of became a bit depressed. And as always, he sought solace in his art. He also was very sick physically, which led to his death in 1943. But as I've worked at the museum, I have become more and more interested in Singer's art. And as a matter of fact, next year, I'm going to be organizing an exhibition of his paintings and those of his contemporaries. And I think he really deserves much more attention. He was so passionate about the Norwegian landscape, the village around Olden, in paintings such as you see on the left there, where you can see how it's overshadowed by the mountain. Beautiful green and blue colors, almost showing the influence of somebody like Georges Seurat, for example. And I think he was very familiar with his work, to the sun's last rays on the right. And the Norwegian landscapes are really, have this sublime quality to them. But they also are very idealized. And for William, nature is where he sought a certain kind of spirituality and peace. The chief themes of his work, such as Dream Harbor or The Coming Storm. And the paintings that we have at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts by Singer are exclusively Norwegian. We do not have anything from the Dutch period or the American periods. So that's what Anna Singer wanted to leave to the museum. And so the first gift comes in 1931 with 100 pieces of art. That's all we had in basically the very early 30s. And then in 1949, she makes another gift of more of these Norwegian scenes. So a little bit about the history and the collections. Here we have what the museum looked like about 1935-36. The gentleman in the upper left is Richard Medford. He was really our first director. He had a predecessor, but she did not stay very long. And he kind of shapes the museum shapes the outlook of the museum and its goals into what we still practice today, at least in my view, This shows you those 100 original works shown in what's today the Schreiber Gallery, but the sculpture court way back then. And there's Medford giving an art extension talk to the community. That's a very important part of our mission, that we speak to the public and we hold all kinds of programs for families and adults, as well as our art school program and our Saturday morning youth program. It all started back here in the 30s. The worldly nature of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts goes back to the very beginning, 1933, with the Exhibition of Persian Art that was loaned by the Institute of Persian Archaeology and Art in New York City. Some of the items coming from the famous collector Dekran Kalikian at the time. And in those days, I'm always amazed when I look through the archives. They would put together such a large show in 3 galleries only, from May 4th to the 30th, and then it all came down. So it had to go up and come down very quickly. Whole museum. It must have been really a lot of time and effort. And these are some images from that catalog. It was really an interesting show. It included reproductions by an artist named Sarkis Kachadurian, who was Armenian. He recreated frescoes in the Ali Kapı Palace of the Iranian Shahs. And Ali Kapı was a famous residence in Isfahan, Iran, from the 17th century. Changing gears entirely, a couple of years later, in 1935, Medford hosts an exhibition of Mexican art. And here you're looking at one of the prints that was in the show by Diego Rivera called Zapata. And it depicts the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata holding the reins of a horse among a group of his fellow campesinos, or peasants. And of course, Rivera is known as one of the great Mexican muralists, one of the great modernists, alongside Jose Clemente Orozco, whose prints were also in this show that you see over here. Entirely different, around the same time, mid to late 30s, modern photography by people like Bernice Abbott, and you also had Lionel Feininger, Paul Strand, Imogen Cunningham, and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. You have Man Ray. I'm just reading some names here. Ansel Adams was in this show too. So the museum really was very eclectic in these days. You may ask, how did we borrow these things? Back in the 1930s, things were a bit different. This was a show that was actually circulated by the Museum of Modern Art, if you can imagine that. Now the MoMA has grown to be so big. But in its early days, it was really trying to promote its collection and its mission. So it would take works from their still growing collection at the time and send them out on the road. It's a concept very different from today, where this type of a museum organizes blockbuster, huge exhibitions that may only go to a select few big institutions. But at this time, they were kind of doing the same thing as we were. They're brand new and they're trying to promote themselves. As the 40s move on, we have Jack Kraft, who is one of our directors I also admire very much in our history. He came from near Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania originally. He studied at Johns Hopkins University, like Medford before him. He was trained as an archaeologist, and he also attended the Sorbonne University in Paris. And he stayed at our museum from 1940 to 1949. And in the photo on the right there, that's our 10th anniversary, and that shows a sculpture that is the mascot of the museum and in many ways of the city of Hagerstown and the park, by Anna Hyatt Huntington. And under Kraft's leadership, that sculpture was acquired. It is a jewel of a piece. If you've ever visited the museum, you will see it in the rotunda. And from the very earliest times, in the architect's drawings by the architectural firm Hyde and Shepard that designed the original building, they envisioned putting a sculpture inside the rotunda. So when the museum was having talks with artist Anna Hyatt Huntington, who, by the way, is one of the most important women sculptors of her time, this was the absolute perfect fit. So in these drawings, Hyde and Shepard, you can see there, project for a future placement of a sculpture. Now today it's enclosed in glass if you come to the museum, the rotunda. But back then it was open to the elements. It was open to the elements actually up through the late 90s when it was enclosed to protect the sculpture. And it is just beautiful, as you can see, just so graceful. And this shows the crowds at the opening reception back in 1941, September of 41. The Greco-Roman goddess Diana appearing to release an imaginary arrow into the air. And she stands on top of an orb, as she is goddess of the hunt and also of the moon. And she lets it go as the dog below her, one of her hunting hounds, reacts to her gesture. There's this tremendous grace between the actions that she is performing and the reaction of the dog down below. It's a stunning work. When you go into the gallery, you can walk all the way around it and really take it in. She always stays there and is sort of very much physically and also metaphorically attached to the art museum since 1941. Also, Anna Hyatt Huntington had a passion for animals because her father was a zoologist. So she really absorbed his interests in animals and in their behavior, their movements, and she created all kinds of sculptures based upon these various animals, particularly lions and cats. Kraft also was very important in acquiring old master paintings and another icon of the museum. It was under his leadership that our first purchase was made in 1940, and that is Thomas Moran's Lower Manhattan from Communipaw, which is a unique painting. One of the oldest paintings in our collection, Giovanni Mazzone, Saints Mary, Magdalene, and Paul, about 1480 to 90, just one panel from what used to be a triptych, part of a very large altarpiece. Both of these are on view at the museum. Thomas Moran is most often known for doing these enormous Western scenes of the Yellowstone and also the Yosemite. He plays a seminal role in the surveying of the American West, particularly the Yellowstone, and creating our national parks back in the early 1870s. This is a product of one of those expeditions. But the picture that we have of Washington County is unique because it depicts industrial pollution. And for a brief period in the late 1870s and early 80s, Moran, who's originally from England, takes a trip to New York City. He stays in New Jersey, and that's where you're seeing this view. Today, it would be hard to try to find this because a lot of this has vanished. It's kind of near, not far off from Elizabeth and Liberty Park in New Jersey. And from here, he would look out and he could see all this pollution. These are sugar refineries and also other kinds of textile mills spewing forth smoke and steam into the air. It merges with the clouds up above. And as you could see, he created a watercolor up here in which he was looking again at this subject. We also have the preliminary drawing that's shown down below here, his first ideas for this composition, and then here again the sugar refineries a couple years later from 1884. It's among my favorite paintings in the collection. But in the drawing from 1880, he's got a propeller down here that disappears in the final composition. He's got an idea of sort of the debris here, but the skyline, you can actually make it out more. There's a steamer, paddle wheel steamer over here, and then you can see the skyline. However, when he creates the final painting, a lot of that is obscured. The paddle wheel boat is gone, and it's hard for us to make out the skyline because it's obscured by this pollution. In terms of talking about environmental issues, very relevant to today, he's expressing a certain degree of anxiety about, is this really the best future for America? It's progress indeed, but look at what we are doing to the planet Earth to achieve it. Some might argue that it's sort of a glorification of this. I think it's more a concern. Look at all the debris that are down here in the foreground, all the pollution, petroleum and other waste over here. There's almost still life elements to it. This photograph can't do the painting justice. But it's really an outstanding work. And as I had mentioned, singular in his entire body of work. So it's a special painting and a very wise first purchase. Kraft will create a display of old masters, shown in this photo sometime in the mid-1940s, that still stands today. We still use our Schreiber Gallery to display our old master collections. And he, very importantly, that shows you what the gallery looks like today, hosts more exhibitions, many of them loaned from New York, particularly E&A Silberman galleries for old masters, and then leading up to the 1949 expansion of the museum that puts on the two wings that you see here. The Bowman Concert Gallery to the right, and then to the left on that side is the Singer Gallery. And right there is Anna Singer at the opening party in November of 1949. Remember the wise and the foolish virgins I showed you before in their home? There they are. She had them removed from the house and sent them over from the Netherlands with a bunch of other artworks as a gift as part of the expansion of the museum, again funded by the Singers. They're the main benefactors. There's Anna there. She's talking probably to a local political official or donor to the museum. And Singer's paintings are placed on view at that time as a special inaugural exhibition. And that's what the Singer Gallery looks like today. We have works, I should point out, also by Rodin. And Rodin was a sculptor very dear to the heart of the Singers. One of my favorites in the collection by him is Fugit Amor, or Fugitive Love. Just a stunning work. That one's not on view at the moment, but I hope to get it out at some point. We have other works of American Impressionism by Richard Emil Miller called The Fan, and then a friend of the Singers, Martin Borgård's Norwegian Sailor. So there's really a cross-section in the Singer Gallery of paintings and sculptures that try to recreate in a certain way the world of our founders, as well as a few Asian decorative art objects as well. Another work of particular importance is our Equestrian Lafayette by the sculptor Paul Whalen Bartlett. Perhaps not a household name, but Bartlett is really an interesting sculptor. He was trained under the animal sculptor Fremier in Paris, and he takes a particular interest, like Anna Hyatt Huntington, in depicting animals. As you can see here, General Lafayette from the Revolution on horseback in this instance. And he was also a friend of Anna and William Singer, part of their circle of artist friends, hence her giving us this sculpture in 1949. Paul Whalen Bartlett was commissioned to create a large equestrian Lafayette for France, for Paris, the commission being completed in 1908, in exchange for and thanking the French for having given us the Statue of Liberty by Bartholdi and Eiffel back in 1886. So the one that we have is a sort of a small-scale version. It's not a study, but it's the second step in the process. First, Bartlett would have created a plaster, and then after that, he would have created a small bronze, and then from that, cast the final piece, which is today in Paris. If you look over here along the hoof of the horse, there is a turtle. And this is a little joke that the sculptor put into the piece to remark on the slow progress of this commission, which took him something around 8 years. And his stepdaughter used to tease him a great deal about it. So he put that in there as a joke. In the 1950s, we were fortunate enough to acquire the talents of Bruce Etchison, who was our director from 1950 to 1964. He introduced at the museum our television art extension program, in which he would go on TV back then and talk about different works of art. There he's talking about a portrait of a lady, probably by a Dutch artist, and then what was thought to be back then a Rembrandt, but it's actually a copy of a work in a Scottish collection. And he was very energetic, very dynamic. He was also an artist. And Here he is with the dealer of old master paintings, Aber Silberman. And they're standing here with a work done after Albrecht Dürer that was on loan to our museum at that time. He brought exhibitions such as The Life of Christ, which was organized in conjunction with the Walters Art Museum in 1951, to Saints in Art, a collaborative project with Mr. Silberman over here. So Bruce Etchison really worked to try to build our old masters collection in the 1950s. Another one which some of our older visitors still remember, medieval and Renaissance arms and armor, loaned from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you've ever gone into the Met and seen their arms and armor galleries, they're quite extraordinary. And these were selections from that. The entire museum was deinstalled and this show was put up in 1955. And then it culminated in 56 with the 25th anniversary, an exhibition of European masterpieces. Again, was supported in large part by Aber Silberman. And some of my particularly favorite old masters include our Godfrey Shalkin of the artist there. It's a self-portrait of him holding a candle where the entire canvas is illuminated by this light. I'm also very fond of the school of Mathieu Lenain, French Baroque artist, of Henri Coiffier de Rouzet, who very famously, I might add, tried to oppose Cardinal Mazarin, and Cardinal Richelieu, and he was executed by Richelieu and accused of having betrayed France by forming a secret treaty with Spain in the mid-1600s. And then on the right, an artist who is associated with the circle of Raphael, Timoteo Viti, his self-portrait of 1509. So to point out some of the highlights of the works in the Schreiber Gallery. This painting by Godfrey Shalkin is really interesting because it actually survived a shipwreck. It was part of a bunch of cargo that came over from England, but during a hurricane in the early 1800s, it fell into the water when the ship was wrecked. It was salvaged from that wreck, and it made its way up the Atlantic coast, eventually to a collector some of you might have heard of in Baltimore named Robert Gilmore. He was a very important art collector and arts patron in Baltimore in the early to mid-1800s. And from Gilmore's collection, it made it to the Law Rogers family, and then it came to us. So it has a very interesting history, this painting. Shalkin being Dutch, but making a career in England. In addition to American and European art of the Western tradition, we also have works by Asian cultures, particularly Tibetan, Buddhist, Chinese, is represented by this painting of the goddess Guan Yin on the left. These beautiful cloisonné, enameled metal bells, and also ceramics. Here are some jeweled Tibetan accessories in performing different rituals. So, as I had mentioned before, the Singers were very interested by Asian art. They were captivated by it, and in 1931 they gave us a series of these beautiful tanka paintings that were part of our original rotating displays. So at times in our history we have had exhibitions of Chinese and Japanese art, such as the one in 1956, The Arts of the Far East, which was a really large show. More recently, we have had the stations along the Tokaido Road several years ago that was on loan from the Reading Museum of Japanese Prints. And it's one of the things I really like about working at this museum is we collect and display arts of all different cultures. It makes things challenging sometimes because you have to sort of go between many different traditions, but it makes it much more interesting than doing just one thing. This here is a fresco, very likely of a Taoist spirit that's in our collection that was donated by Cornelius Ruxton Love, whose wife, Audrey Love, would become a major benefactor of the New York Philharmonic. So back in the 50s, our museum really had very close ties to the arts world in philanthropic circles in New York City. Back in 2018 to 19, we refurbished our American art galleries, and we represented our collections to showcase new voices, such as the still life over here by Charles Ethan Porter, an important African-American still life artist, and Joshua Johnson, the artist that Corey had mentioned in his introduction. One of the first, if not the first, professional black artist in America, whose story is right here in Maryland, in Baltimore. Our collection has outstanding examples by Thomas Cole, his study for the voyage of life, particularly childhood, Frederick Edwin Church, and Raphael Peale. In fact, much of the entire Peale family of artists. The one that we have, the Cole, is a study for this figure shown down below. This work is in the National Gallery in Washington, but ours is of the study of the angel aboard that beautiful boat that's glittering there with the gold. The entire painting, though, on the right, being an allegory of the different stages of life. It's really a remarkable series. The last time I was at the National Gallery, I believe it's still installed there in its own gallery with all of the different stages of life, from childhood all the way through old age. The Frederick Church, seen on the Catskill Creek, is a really outstanding piece. It's a very early one, and it shows the influence of his teacher, Thomas Cole, often considered the founder of the Hudson River School. His view on the Catskill Creek, in some ways similar, but in some ways also different in terms of it being even more idealized and pastoral than Church is seen over here, where we have the man who's in a boat. And the only disturbance to the water are those ripples that you see here in the foreground. Probably late in the day, this painting, sometime in the afternoon before evening in the summer. It's a stunning work. As the museum continued to develop and expand, we started to also acquire works by modern American artists, including Edward Steichen, who's known more as a photographer, but he was originally trained as a painter until he made a very strange decision to destroy most of his pictorial work and dedicate himself exclusively to photography. Our painting called Yellow Moon is one of those survivors, luckily, from his decision to get rid of them. Another icon of the museum is our Norman Rockwell illustration called the Oculus, which has an interesting story. We had it conserved last year, and we finally put it in our Kirstein Gallery for 20th Century Art. We also have works by the group known as the Eight, or in more distant years, it was called the Ashken School of American Modernists. But Norman Rockwell was really not at all connected to the kind of aesthetic of Jerome Myers or Edward Steichen, for that matter. He was really interested in depicting these idealized scenes of American life. But actually, he later wrote about this, that he did this in order to make a living. He did consider himself in many regards to be a fine artist. And the painting that we have, back in that time, Bruce Etchison approached him and asked him, well, you know, we are a small museum. We'd very much like to acquire one of your paintings. We can't afford the prices you would ordinarily charge. Would you be able to basically do a discount? And Rockwell was thrilled about this. And he wrote him back and said, your museum is the kind of place that I want to place my artwork. And this one particularly fascinated Etchison because the little boy who does not want to be fitted for the glasses here reminded him of his own son. So that kind of played a role in his picking this work. And it was a Saturday Evening Post cover. This is the magazine, May 19th, 1956. So the original illustration, and then it reproduced there on the magazine cover. A really beloved work in the collection. Many people come to see this from all over, including locally, but it is beloved. In the 1970s, our director, Henry Coton, who was an artist, began to expand the collection in different ways. He acquired contemporary and modern works, as well as continuing to acquire works in the European tradition, such as the Metzger gift there with Robert Presler, who was the curator back then. And we got important works by Jasper Johns, such as his Viola work, series up there, Still Life with Pitcher and Flowers by Roy Lichtenstein, and the famous Love which is a print. It's actually made up of 4 different pieces that are put together by Robert Indiana. Now, many of these works are not on view because they are light sensitive. So they often stay in storage, but we hope to be able to get them out. In the 1980s, our director Gene Woods continued to make important acquisitions, including our Joshua Johnson paintings of the Yo family members of Hagerstown. Joseph Holston, who we're going to be featuring in an exhibition just weeks from now, and the Miller collection of 19th and early 20th century American and European art were some of the highlights of her time there, as well as art glass from the Art Nouveau period. More recently, our director Rebecca Massey Lane made significant acquisitions of artists such as Jacob Lawrence, very famous and important African-American painter and printmaker, and then also the Perry collection came in 2018, containing works ranging all the way from medieval manuscripts to prints by Ferdinand Léger and Richard Diebenkorn. Over 300 pieces, and a very interesting collection that I hope to do more with. And in 2020, we had Sarah Hall join the museum as our director, and working with Sarah, we have continued to acquire in the eclectic manner that the museum has carried on over the decades, with acquisitions of contemporary photography by Dennis Farber, shown up here, and then a Haida Art Nouveau glass vessel that's shown down over here. And a little bit about our exhibitions more recently. Cumberland Valley Artists and Photographers exhibition. We've held it every year since 1932 or 33. And then also the art from the Washington County Public Schools. We do that every year. An important exhibition for me and also for the museum that we worked on during Rebecca's time, the Blues and the Abstract Truth, Voices of African American Art. Our museum is, with exhibitions like Joshua Johnson, has started to emphasize more diversity and different kinds of voices and representation in the museum. This show drew upon works in the collection of University of Maryland Global Campus and the David Driscoll Center at College Park. And it was a lot of fun to put this together. Jacob Lawrence print up here from the Toussaint de l'Ouverture series, the famous revolutionary figure in the Haitian Revolution, or Faith Ringgold down here, and Romer Bearden, and James Van Der Zee, photographer. I really enjoyed putting that together. And then building upon the work for the Blues Show, sort of in some regards led to the Joshua Johnson, Portraitist of Early American Baltimore exhibition, in which we explored for the first time since the late 1980s the work of America's really first professional portraitist of African American descent. And among the highlights, in addition to our portraits of the Yo family members in Hagerstown, was this portrait believed to be of Abner Coker, a black minister who lived in Baltimore, from the Bowdoin College Museum of Art in Maine. While we don't have any more catalogs available from this exhibition in printed form, if you're interested in one, we still have ebooks available, just to let you know. Last summer, we had Bernini in the Roman Baroque, masterpieces from Palazzo Chigi in Aricia, that was organized and toured by IANA, International Art and Artists in Washington, which you may have heard of. They have a contemporary art space as well, and they're right next door to the Phillips Collection in DC. But they circulate a variety of shows. This was also great fun and very interesting. This showcased the work of artists in the orbit of John Lorenzo Bernini. And then in the fall, very different, we had an exhibition traveling of vintage photographs by Brassai, the famous French modernist photographer of Paris. Last fall, I also spearheaded a reinstallation of our Kirstein Gallery for Modern American Art. And this is on view still right now, so I encourage you to come and see it. Some of the works that I had pointed out, there's the Rockwell I mentioned before, and then there's Yellow Moon and the Jerome Myers, but there are also many other pieces. Joe Holston's Jazz at Tacoma Station, too. Another very interesting project in which I was looking at works by abstract artists as well as artists working in representational style from the collection. Last fall, we had Bouke de Vries War in Pieces. He's a Dutch artist who takes pieces of broken porcelain and reassembles them into these really fascinating tableaus. And this shows the installation in the Schreiber Gallery from last summer, a show that was brought to us by Sarah Hall, our director. And we had a lot of fun with this. Really outstanding. You can check out a YouTube video in which we had a virtual studio tour with Bouke. He works in England, but he's Dutch. Right now, we have Exploring Jonathan Street, History, Art, Imagination, which explores the heritage of the historically black neighborhood located around Jonathan Street in Hagerstown. And at the center of this are archaeological artifacts that were excavated from the cabin site on Jonathan Street. You may have read about in the local paper that this cabin in 2018, a police cruiser struck it during a pursuit of a suspect. In the process, what happened was it revealed the original timbers from the 1700s. It had a siding over it, and it was determined that this was a very important historic structure. So they looked into it more deeply, and Preservation Maryland got involved with it, and they decided to totally renovate the cabin. Now it actually has an owner. It's occupied. Before that, it was kind of in and out of ownership. And as part of the renovation of the cabin was the excavation of these archaeological artifacts, including bottles, shards of ceramics, and other pieces and objects that tell the story of the inhabitants. So I encourage you to see that. Building on the tradition of the Persian art exhibition way long ago in 1933, we also have Allure of the Near East, treasures from the Huntington Museum of Art in West Virginia. And it's a beautiful show of primarily Islamic art. So do come and see it. It's really beautiful. And this Sunday we have a community day gathering from 1 to 4 p.m. I just wanted to slip that in there. And feel free to come. There will be a gallery discussion and other activities. I will be there too. Right around the corner, I'm working on it right as we speak, Joseph Holston, Color and Freedom, Journey Along the Underground Railroad. Joe Holston is a Maryland artist. He's African American. And this is part of a series he did in 2008 that depict the journeys, the trials, the tribulations, the hardships of African Americans, not a specific person individually, but sort of metaphorically looks at their journey through these paintings, from being captured in Africa to being freed in America. And it should be a very exciting show. And then we also have from the pages of Pan Art Nouveau prints that comes up a bit later this fall, from the publication created during the Art Nouveau period, 1890s, with artists such as Toulouse-Lautrec, Aubrey Beardsley, Peter Behrens, and Henri Edmond Cross over there, who was a post-impressionist. And these are borrowed from the Dree House Museum collection in Chicago. And now, as we get close to wrapping up, I wanted to share with you a very interesting and recent discovery that I made. It was featured in the paper at the end of December last year. We received a year-end donation from a John and Sylvia O'Brien, who are collectors of old master prints and drawings. And in there was a drawing by the artist named Sasso Ferrato. Sasso Ferrato was an Italian Baroque artist, Roman, and of the Roman Baroque. And lo and behold, this drawing, when it came in, as I started to research it more deeply, I was looking through a catalog, and I found that it was pictured there, and in the caption it said below, missing, /stolen since 1965. I said, that looks really similar to the drawing that we have in our possession. Sure enough, I went and I compared it with the image, and it turned out that it was, in fact, the drawing that had been missing from the Munich Graphic Collection's holdings since 1965. Of course, I had a bit of a drop in my stomach because I was like, oh dear. But at the same time, I said, well, we're going to need to do something about this. I'll come back to the story in a moment. The drawing is a study for Salvi or Sassoferrato's painting of the Madonna and Child from about 1650. It's in the Villa Borghese in Rome. And Sassoferrato was known for these really beautiful, sweet depictions of the Virgin and Child, and particularly the tender interaction between the two figures. So you might wonder when you look at this, I'm going to show you some other slides, why does it look kind of faded? Well, keep that in mind. Here's what it looks like closer up. I should mention that this drawing right now is on view in the museum in a mini-focused exhibit that tells the whole story of this. This is the donor, Dr. John O'Brien, who a couple of years ago sold part of his very large collection of master drawings at Sotheby's. And he's a very interesting person. He's been collecting since 1972, even actually before that. And this is the catalog that I was looking at, the page to be exact, and that's where I found the drawing. There it is. It says in Italian on the left, opera perduta or missing, lost work. Look at how much darker the shading was. This is a photograph from probably the 50s, maybe earlier. So when I discovered this, of course, I talked to my colleagues and we did contact the FBI. And then after that, we reached out to the Munich Graphic Collection and let them know that we had a work that looked like something that once belonged to them. And sure enough, they provided us with the proof of ownership and their documentation, and it was that. When you take the images and you put them on top of each other, it matches up. Look at how much darker it is, though. See? What the thief did, whoever it was who stole this from the Munich collection, they totally went over the entire work. They probably soaked it in a solution of some kind, and then used brushes or erasers to make it look faded so that it would not be as recognizable on the black market. Another thing they did, see 87, 81 down here? They scrubbed that off, leaving behind only his signature, Sassoferrato. These are steps that thieves take to disguise the work if you're going to sell it on the black market. Now, a piece like this back in the 1960s would have been easier to steal because it was not very well published. Oil paintings are much better published. And we're very fortunate that there was a photograph in the Munich collections archive documenting it, because in the age before digital photography, you were lucky if you could have something this detailed. Germans are very good record keepers, so in that regard, we kind of lucked out. The other thing, the hand. It's almost obliterated on the sheet. And we'd kind of wondered when the drawing came in, I remember looking at it with Sarah, and we said, this is awfully faint. And it was kind of strange that this had been obscured, but then when I discovered it pictured in the 2017 catalog, it all came together, and I said, oh, goodness. But at least it has not vanished. And sometime later this fall, the drawing is going to be repatriated to Germany. And you may ask yourself, well, where was it before 1965? We don't know when it actually went missing. It was recorded as first stolen by one of the museum curators on August 13th, 1965. But prior to its discovery, it's possible it might have disappeared. May have been taken by a staff member, it may have been taken by a researcher. In those days, as you've probably heard in the news, even today, some people, I forget the guy's name, at the Beinecke Library at Yale, they would cut out illustrations from books and slip them into a briefcase. So this one probably walked in a manner similar to that from its repository. But originally it entered the collection, the Royal Bavarian collections, sometime in the, actually, it's first inventoried in 1823. So it was part of the Georg von Stengel collection from the 1800s. This shows you the back of it. That's just to give you a sense of the whole piece. This little G here is Dr. O'Brien's collector's mark. What collectors of old master drawings do is they will put on their own little monogram. But as far as we know, Dr. O'Brien was not aware that the drawing was stolen. And this does happen. These images show the original inventory from Munich. And the Sassoferrato is, just, let's see here, this one, 8781, and there it is. The Germans keep meticulous records. They really do. And that's the identification card for it from their files. And then another inventory done in the 1850s that shows it again. So it's possible it could have disappeared during World War II, even. Because sometimes, if you know, being in museum work, you periodically, every few years, will do a re-inventorying of your collections to check is everything where it's supposed to be. But sometimes there are things that are tucked away in a corner, and they may not be checked upon for many years. So that may have happened here in Munich. But they are very happy. I was in touch with the head curator, and they are very pleased that we discovered this and that we can send it back home where it belongs. So, thank you very much, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Will you be teaching an art history class this fall? You've done them on Zoom before, Dr. Fulco.
I don't know if we have one planned for this fall, but the next time that we do have one, we'll certainly let you know. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Does the museum do its own conservation work or work sent out?
Since we're a small museum, we don't retain a full-time conservator on staff. In contrast to the Baltimore Museum of Art or the Walters, where they are on staff. So if we have conservation work done, we go to an independent conservator. Mm-hmm.
Did the singers go to Norway? What season of the year did they prefer to paint in Norway? I was curious.
The winter was really a favorite of Williams. But as you can see from the other paintings, they would go in spring, sometimes they would go in summer. It was kind of hard to figure out when, if they had a schedule.
There was snow, obviously, in the winter. It was a snowy environment. So, but there were lots of spring-like pictures as well, so I was curious.
Yeah, they end up going to Norway actually more later on. And then I think after William died in 1943, Anna did go back to Norway, but I think she started to spend more time in Laren. And that's what leads to her founding the Laren Museum in 1956. Any other questions?
It was a great story about the painting. I recently watched that documentary on the missing Da Vinci. What were your feelings on that? Have you seen that?
I don't know if I've seen that one yet.
Okay.
I'll have to check that out. Do you remember what it was? Was it on PBS or?
I might not be remembering this right, but they found a missing Da Vinci and restored it, and then the Saudi Arabians, the Saudis bought it.
Oh, the Salvator Mundi.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, I did read all about that. It's many scholars will say that they don't think that it's a Leonardo. It may be a part Leonardo, but it has a lot of work that's been done by other conservators, and it may be more of a workshop piece, but that's open to debate. So,
How do you add to your collection? How do you you collecting current day artists, like Paul Tooley, and the Newman up front there, you know, it's.
Well, it's kind of, many things are donated to the museum. We receive many gifts. Since I've been at the museum, not a lot of purchasing, but it's primarily gifts. Sometimes they're from museum members. Other times they are, people approach us out of the blue because they're looking to have a home for things in their collection. But for example, we purchased these two prints shortly after the Blues in the Abstract Truth exhibition by Faith Ringgold, Mama Goodson, and Paula Complo. And in terms of contemporary art, we do collect it. Most recently, hold on a second. Back. We acquired several photographs, a small group of them, by Dennis Farber. So we're approached by a number of different organizations, foundations. For example, the Kohler Foundation recently made a gift of works by William Gutter, a Washington artist. And then the Dennis Farber Trust donated a group of his photographs. So it happens in various ways. We also receive requests from estates, people's estates who want to remember us in their will. Many different ways. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Daniel. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
your time.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention, if you know of anyone that wasn't able to make it out to the talk, or having heard it, if you know of anyone that's interested, over several weeks' time, we'll post these up on our YouTube channel, so you can go to our website, check out our YouTube channel from previous talks over the last couple of years. But thank you again, Daniel. Really appreciate you coming out and talking to us.
You're welcome. Thank you, and please come and visit WCMFA.
Yes.